Beneath our feet, beneath the solid ground we take for granted, lies a realm of profound mystery, an empire of darkness and pressure. For millennia, humanity has gazed upward at the stars, seeking answers in the cold, glittering expanse of the cosmos. But perhaps the greatest unknown is not out there, but down here. A question, whispered in ancient myths and shouted in modern conspiracies, has haunted the fringes of our imagination for centuries. Could our world be a hollow sphere, a shell, and in its vast, secret heart, could there be another world, another sky, another civilization entirely? This is the enduring legend of the hollow earth, a notion so audacious it seems to belong purely to the realm of fantasy. Yet, it is a concept that has captivated some of history's finest minds, inspiring epic literature and fueling obsessive quests for truth. It speaks to a fundamental human desire for undiscovered frontiers, for a last, great bastion of the unknown in a world that feels increasingly mapped, measured, and explained. The story begins not with science, but with the soul's geography. Across countless cultures and epochs, the underworld was a palpable reality. It was Hades for the ancient Greeks, a shadowy realm of the dead. For the Maya, it was the terrifying labyrinth of Xibalba. In almost every cosmology, the depths held power, spirits, and secrets. These were not geological theories, but spiritual maps, reflecting a universal intuition that the world beneath our souls was as complex and significant as the heavens above our heads. But in the Age of Enlightenment, myth began to give way to measurement. The world was becoming a machine, a grand clockwork mechanism to be understood through reason and observation. And it was in this climate that the idea of a hollow planet graduated from religious belief to scientific hypothesis. The first truly scientific proposal came from a remarkable figure, Edmund Halley, the very same astronomer who predicted the return of his namesake comet. In the late 17th century, Halley was consumed by a different puzzle: the Earth's strange and shifting magnetic field. He noticed the magnetic poles weren't fixed, they drifted over time. To explain this anomaly, Halley conceived of a breathtakingly elegant model. He proposed that our planet was not a solid ball of rock, but a series of concentric spheres, one nested inside the other, each spinning at a slightly different speed. In Halley's vision, these inner shells could be inhabited. He imagined their atmospheres were luminous, creating a perpetual, gentle twilight. He even speculated that the aurora borealis, the northern lights, was not an atmospheric phenomenon, but gas escaping from this interior world through thin patches in the Earth's crust at the poles. It was a magnificent, almost poetic solution from a brilliant mind, an attempt to reconcile perplexing data with a vision of a fuller, richer cosmos. Halley's idea remained a curiosity for over a century, a footnote in scientific history. Then, in the early 19th century, it was resurrected with fanatical zeal by an American veteran of the War of 1812 named John Cleves Symmes Jr. Symmes was not a trained scientist like Halley. He was a man possessed by a single, all-consuming idea. He believed the Earth was not only hollow, but that it was habitable within, and crucially, that it was accessible. He envisioned massive openings at the North and South poles, great yawning holes thousands of kilometers wide, which he called the Symmes holes. Through these portals, he believed, a brave explorer could sail a ship directly into the interior of our planet. In 1818, he launched a relentless campaign, sending a declaration to universities, learned societies, and governments around the world. He declared, "I hold the Earth is hollow and habitable within, containing a number of solid concentric spheres, one within the other, and that it is open at the poles 12 or 16 degrees. Symmes was not content with mere theory. He wanted to go there. He petitioned the United States Congress to fund an expedition to the North Pole to find the opening and enter the inner world. He saw himself as a new Columbus, not discovering a new continent, but an entirely new world hidden within our own. His followers saw him as a prophet. His detractors saw him as a madman. Though Congress rejected his proposals, His passion was infectious. His ideas, while scientifically baseless, ignited a powerful flame. In the public imagination, the dream of an inner world was no longer just an intellectual curiosity. It was an adventure waiting to happen. This adventure found its ultimate expression not in a congressional grant, but in the pages of literature. In 1864, the French author Jules Verne took the kernel of this fantastic idea and cultivated it into a masterpiece. His novel, Journey to the Center of the Earth transformed the hollow Earth from a fringe theory into a global cultural phenomenon. Verne's narrative was a masterclass in speculative world-building. His heroes don't enter through a polar opening, but descend through the crater of an extinct Icelandic volcano. As they journey deeper, they travel back through geological time. They discover a vast, subterranean sea illuminated by an inexplicable electrochemical process in the atmosphere, a sky of eternal twilight. They encounter prehistoric forests of giant mushrooms, herds of mastodons, and even a mysterious, towering humanoid. Verne's genius was to ground his fantasy in the science of his day. He filled the story with discussions of geology, paleontology, and physics, lending an air of plausibility to the impossible. For millions of readers, the journey of Professor Liedenbrock and his nephew Axel was not just a story, it was a tantalizing glimpse of what could be. It cemented the image of the Earth's interior as a lost world, a prehistoric paradise preserved in the planet's heart. The seed planted by Halley and watered by Sims had now, through Verne's artistry, blossomed into a permanent fixture of our collective imagination. But as the fictional explorers of the 19th century were battling ichthyosaurs in a subterranean sea, real scientists were developing new ways to probe the Earth's depths, tools that were far more powerful than any drill or digging machine. They were learning to listen to the planet's own heartbeat, to the profound vibrations that shudder through its core in the aftermath of an earthquake. This new science was seismology, and it would ultimately provide the definitive answer to the question of our planet's inner structure. To understand how it works, imagine the Earth is not a sphere of rock, but a colossal, impossibly complex musical instrument, a bell the size of a world. Now, imagine this bell is struck by a colossal hammer. This strike is an earthquake, a sudden, violent release of energy. This energy doesn't just travel across the surface, it radiates outwards in all directions, sending powerful waves of vibration deep into the heart of the planet. These are seismic waves, and they are our messengers from the abyss. Scientists installed listening posts all over the globe, sensitive instruments called seismographs, which act like a global network of ears. When an earthquake happens in, say, Japan, these instruments, in California, in Europe, in Antarctica, can all hear the vibration, but the sound they hear is not the same. It is altered by its journey. Just as a sound wave changes as it passes through air, then water, then glass, seismic waves change speed and direction as they travel through different materials inside the Earth. There are two primary types of these vibrations. Primary waves, or P waves, are compression waves. They are like a pulse sent down a stretched slinky, compressing and expanding the material they move through. They can travel through solids, liquids, and gases. Secondary waves, or S waves, are shear waves. They move more like a snake, wiggling from side to side. Crucially, these S waves cannot travel through liquid. A liquid has no rigidity, it cannot be sheared. This single physical fact became the key to unlocking the Earth's greatest secret. In the early 20th century, seismologists noticed a bizarre pattern. When a major earthquake occurred, there was a vast shadow zone on the opposite side of the planet where S waves were never detected. They would travel down into the Earth and then, simply, vanish. The only possible explanation was that they had encountered a massive barrier of liquid, something that was stopping them cold. This discovery was monumental. It was the first proof that at the heart of our world lay a colossal core of molten, liquid material. The Earth was not hollow, But it wasn't entirely solid either. It had a liquid heart. Through decades of listening to these planetary echoes, a remarkably detailed portrait of our world's interior has emerged. It is a world far stranger and more extreme than anything Verne imagined. The journey begins by piercing the crust, the thin, brittle shell we live on. In cosmic terms, it is almost infinitesimally thin. If the Earth were the size of an apple, the crust would be no thicker than the apple's skin. It is a fragile raft of rock floating on a sea of fire. Below this lies the mantle. This is the great bulk of our planet, a 3,000-kilometer thick layer of silicate rock. It is not a raging liquid, but a solid that behaves like a liquid over immense geological timescales. It churns in colossal slow-motion convection currents, like thick tar boiling in a pot for millions of years. These currents are the engine of our world. They drive the continents, push up mountains, and tear open oceans. This is the force that fuels volcanoes and triggers earthquakes. Deeper still, we reach the boundary that defeated the S-waves. This is the outer core. It is a sphere of liquid iron and nickel, larger than the planet Mars, swirling and flowing at temperatures exceeding 4,000 degrees Celsius. The violent, churning motion of this metallic ocean acts as a gigantic dynamo, a planetary-scale electrical generator. This dynamo produces Earth's magnetic field, the invisible shield, that extends far out into space, protecting us from the deadly solar wind. Without this liquid outer core, our atmosphere would be stripped away, and the surface of our planet would be a sterilized, irradiated wasteland. Our world's life force is generated deep within its molten heart, and at the very center of it all, we find the final surprise. Here, the pressure is so extreme, so unbelievably immense, that it overwhelms the staggering heat. It is a pressure more than 3.5 million times greater than the atmospheric pressure at sea level. Imagine stacking a dozen of the world's largest skyscrapers on your thumbnail. This incomprehensible force squeezes the iron and nickel atoms so tightly that they are forced back into a solid state, despite being hotter than the surface of the sun, reaching nearly 6,000 degrees Celsius. This is the inner core, a solid ball of crystalline metal, a white-hot sphere of iron suspended in the middle of a liquid inferno, spinning, perhaps, just a little faster than the rest of the planet. This is the true center of our world. Not a verdant paradise, but a place of physics so extreme, it borders on the surreal. This scientific model, built on a century of irrefutable evidence, leaves no room for a hollow interior. The sheer mass and density of the Earth, which we can calculate from its gravitational pull on the moon and satellites, perfectly matches this layered structure of a dense metallic core. A hollow planet would be far lighter, its gravity would be significantly weaker. Moreover, the physics of gravity itself makes the idea impossible. If you were to stand on the inner surface of a hollow shell, the gravitational pull from the mass in the shell all around you would cancel out in a very peculiar way. An object in the exact center would be weightless. An object on the inner surface would be pulled, not down toward the ground, but away from it toward the greater mass of the shell on the far side. Life could not exist, as there would be no down. And then there are the practicalities of the proposed entrances. The Sims holes, those grand gateways at the poles, simply do not exist. For decades, the poles have been overflown, photographed by satellites in breathtaking detail, and traversed by explorers on the ground. We have mapped every square meter of the polar ice caps. What we find is not a gaping hole, but miles of solid ice, and, beneath that, the solid crust of the Earth. The scientific verdict is unambiguous. The case is closed. The Earth is not hollow, and yet the idea did not die. It proved to be more resilient than the science that refuted it. Like a mythological hydra, when one head was severed by fact, two more seemed to grow in the realm of belief. In the mid-20th century, the hollow Earth theory underwent a bizarre transformation. merging with the burgeoning mythology of unidentified flying objects. New narratives emerged, suggesting that UFOs did not come from other planets, but from an advanced civilization living deep inside our own. The theory became entangled with stories of secret Nazi bases in Antarctica and tales of ancient super races like the Aryans or the inhabitants of Atlantis, who had retreated into the Earth's core to escape some surface cataclysm. Perhaps the most famous and persistent of these modern myths is the supposed secret diary of Admiral Richard E. Byrd. Byrd was a decorated naval officer and a pioneering polar aviator. The story, which emerged decades after his death, claims that during a flight over the North Pole in 1947, he flew his plane into one of the polar openings. According to this fabricated diary, he entered a lush, green world of mountains and rivers and saw woolly mammoths grazing peacefully. He was supposedly intercepted by flying craft of a type he had never seen before and escorted to a glittering city where he met the leader of an advanced civilization. This master race, the story goes, was concerned about humanity's development of nuclear weapons and sent Byrd back with a warning for the surface world. It is a thrilling, cinematic tale, but it is a complete fiction. Byrd's real flight logs from that period are public record. They contain no mention of any such encounter. The secret diary uses language and concepts that didn't exist at the time, and was penned by conspiracy theorists long after the Admiral was gone. It is a powerful piece of modern folklore, a testament to our desire to believe in something wondrous, hidden just beyond the veil of our perception. Why does this belief persist so stubbornly in the face of all evidence? The answer may lie deep within our own psychology. As a species, we evolved in a world of endless frontiers. For most of our history, there was always another mountain to climb, another river to cross, another ocean to sail. Discovery was woven into our DNA. But in the last century, that has changed. We have mapped the deepest ocean trenches. We have stood on the highest peaks. Satellites have photographed every inch of our globe. The magic of the times terra incognita asterisk, the unknown land, has vanished from our maps. There are no more lost worlds to find. This can feel like a profound loss. The hollow earth theory offers a solution. It re-enchants the world. It creates a new, ultimate frontier, not on the surface, but within. It provides a sanctuary for mystery, in a world that feels overly illuminated by science. It also taps into a powerful vein of conspiratorial thinking. The idea that a truth this monumental could be hidden by governments and scientific institutions is deeply appealing to those who feel disenfranchised or distrustful of authority. It offers a sense of holding secret knowledge, of seeing a deeper reality that the rest of the world is blind to. The hollow earth is no longer a scientific hypothesis. It is a statement of faith, a modern myth that fulfills a deep-seated human need for wonder, for secrets, and for one last, undiscovered country. So, the grand, romantic vision of an inner paradise, of a subterranean sun and a lost civilization, is a fiction. The center of the earth is a place of unimaginable violence and pressure. But this does not mean the world beneath our feet is dead. The truth is, in a way, far more astounding. The quest for a civilization in the center of the earth was not entirely wrong. It was just looking for the wrong kind of civilization. For in recent decades, we have discovered that the earth's depths are not sterile. They are, in fact, teeming with life. A vast, dark kingdom that dwarfs the biomass of the entire surface world. This is the deep biosphere. Scientists have drilled kilometers into the ocean floor and miles deep into the continental crust, and what they have found has shattered our understanding of where life can exist. They discovered microbes, bacteria, and archaea thriving in solid rock in environments with no light, no oxygen, and crushing pressure. This is a form of life utterly alien to our sun-drenched world. These organisms do not rely on photosynthesis. They are not part of the food chain that begins with the sun's energy. Instead, they are chemosynthesizers. They eat rocks, They derive their energy from chemical reactions, metabolizing minerals like iron, sulfur, and hydrogen from their rocky prison. Some of these organisms live on timescales that are almost geological. Their metabolism is so slow, their existence so patient, that they might only divide once every 1,000 years. They are living fossils, part of a shadow biosphere whose genetic lineages diverged from our own billions of years ago. They are the true inhabitants of the deep earth. This is a civilization not of architects and engineers, but of ancient, single-celled survivors. The total amount of carbon locked up in this subterranean life is estimated to be hundreds of times greater than the carbon in all of humanity. There may be more living cells within the Earth's crust than there are stars in the Milky Way galaxy. This is the real inner world. It is not a landscape of green valleys and gentle sunlight. It is a universe of microscopic life forms, dwelling in the dark, in the tiny, fluid-filled pores of rocks, living an existence of profound patience and endurance. They are the planet's hidden foundation, a biological dark matter that has been shaping the geology and chemistry of our world from below for eons, completely unseen. The discovery of this deep biosphere is arguably one of the most significant biological finds in modern history. It fundamentally redefines the limits of life. If life can thrive kilometers deep in the Earth's crust without any connection to the sun, then what does that mean for our search for life elsewhere in the universe? It suggests that the habitable zone around a star is not just a narrow band on a planet's surface where liquid water can exist. The true habitable zone might be the planet itself. Life could be thriving deep beneath the frozen surface of Mars. It could be flourishing in the lightless, subterranean oceans of Jupiter's moon Europa or Saturn's moon Enceladus, powered not by a distant sun, but by the planet's own internal heat and chemical energy, just like the deep life on Earth. Our journey in search of a hollow world has led us full circle. We began with a human-centric dream, a fantasy of finding a mirror of ourselves, a lost kingdom of people hidden from view. We imagined a world within our world, sculpted in our own image. Science methodically dismantled that fantasy, replacing it with a portrait of a planet forged in fire and pressure, of forces so extreme they defy our everyday intuition. And yet, in the final act, science revealed that we were not alone down there after all. The deep Earth is inhabited, but its residents are not ancient humanoids or advanced super beings. They are something far more ancient, more resilient, and perhaps more significant in the grand story of life. They remind us that our planet is not just a stage for human drama, it is a living entity in its own right, with a deep, dark, vibrant life of its own, a life that preceded us by billions of years, and will likely continue long after we are gone. The lure of the hollow Earth was the lure of the unknown. That unknown is still there. We haven't conquered it. We have just begun to appreciate its true nature. The greatest mysteries are not always found in the stories we tell ourselves, but in the profound, complex, and beautiful reality that awaits our patient and humble investigation. The center of the Earth holds no lost paradise. Instead, it holds the truth about our planet's fiery birth, the engine of its dynamic present, and a blueprint for how life might persist in the most unforgiving corners of the cosmos. The journey downward has, in the end, expanded our vision upward, outward, to the stars. What if the final frontier we have sought for millennia, that vast, silent ocean of stars, is not the true challenge? What if the most alien, most uncharted territory, the one place teeming with monsters we cannot predict and cannot conquer, is the 3-pound universe of electrified tissue nestled inside our own skulls? For generations we have stared at the heavens and seen a particular point of light, a crimson beacon in the velvet darkness, and we have given it a name worthy of our ambition and our fear: Mars. It is a world that has inhabited our dreams since we first understood that the wanderers in the night sky were worlds themselves. It is the stuff of myth, the subject of science fiction, the ultimate destination on a celestial map we have been drawing for centuries. Mars is a planetary epic written in rust and rock, a geological saga of a world that might have once been like our own, with flowing rivers, vast oceans, and perhaps the tentative beginnings of life. We see its canyons, scars deeper and longer than any on Earth, and we imagine the cataclysmic floods that carved them. We see its polar ice caps, reservoirs of frozen water holding the secrets of a lost climate, and we dream of a day when human hands can drill into that ancient ice, searching for answers to the most profound questions we can ask. The dream is so powerful, so deeply woven into our cultural DNA, that we have poured the genius of entire generations into making it a reality. We have built machines of breathtaking complexity, technological titans of fire and steel designed to slip the surly bonds of Earth and make that 300 million mile leap across the void. Every calculation has been run. Every trajectory has been plotted. We have mastered the brutal physics of orbital mechanics, bending the will of gravity to our command. We have designed habitats capable of withstanding the lethal radiation of deep space, life support systems that can recycle every precious molecule of water, every atom of air. We have landed robotic emissaries on its surface, our tireless proxies that taste the soil, analyze the atmosphere, and send back portraits of an alien landscape so achingly beautiful, so tantalizingly close. It feels as if you could simply step through the screen and leave the first human footprint in that red dust. The engineering problems, as monumental as they are, appear solvable. The logistics, while staggering, seem surmountable. We have, it seems, answered every question, solved every equation, and vanquished every technical demon that stands between us and the red planet. We are on the precipice, standing at the very edge of becoming a multi-planetary species. But this grand, heroic narrative, the one we tell ourselves in our books and our films, has a chilling unspoken chapter. It is a story not of technological failure, but of human frailty. A story that unfolds not in the vacuum of space, but in the pressurized confines of a tiny capsule, a fragile bubble of life hurtling through an abyss of absolute nothingness. For the journey to Mars is not a quick sprint to a neighbouring shore. It is a multi-year odyssey, a slow, grueling exile unlike anything humanity has ever undertaken. The crew, 4, maybe 6 individuals, will be sealed inside a space no larger than a small recreational vehicle. For nearly 3 years, this will be their entire world. Their horizon will not be a distant mountain range or a rising sun, but the cold, curved wall of their own metal tomb. And as they travel, something unprecedented will happen. Earth, the anchor of all human experience, the bright, swirling marble of blue and white that has comforted every astronaut in low Earth orbit, will begin to shrink. For the first few weeks, it will be a spectacular sight, a vibrant world teeming with all the life, love, and history they have ever known. But soon, it will diminish to a brilliant star, then a pale, insignificant dot of light, indistinguishable from the countless other stars in the overwhelming darkness. The 20-minute communications delay will stretch a conversation into an impossible exchange of historical records, severing the last meaningful connection to 7 billion souls. They will be alone, utterly, terrifyingly, and primordially alone. This is the velvet prison of deep space, an environment so profoundly alien that it attacks not just the body, but the very foundation of the mind. Our brains are evolutionary marvels shaped over millions of years by the rhythms of this planet. We are creatures of sunrise and sunset, of changing seasons, of birdsong and the scent of rain, of wide open spaces and the comforting pressure of a vast social network. Our sanity is tethered to these terrestrial patterns, these sensory inputs that we take for granted. But what happens when you cut those tethers? What happens when every single evolutionary expectation is violated day after day for 1,000 days? The sun is no longer a life-giving orb moving across a blue sky, but a static, ferociously bright star in a field of black, a source of deadly radiation to be shielded against. There is no weather, no gentle breeze, no up or down, save for what the ship's artificial orientation dictates. There is only the ceaseless monotonous hum of the life support system, and the same few faces, day after agonizing day. This is the breeding ground for a unique form of madness, an insidious psychological decay that mission planners fear more than any solar flare or engine malfunction. It begins subtly. The constant low-grade stress, the unyielding awareness that you're one thin sheet of metal away from instantaneous oblivion, begins to fray the nerves. The lack of new stimuli, a condition known as perceptual monotony, can starve the brain, causing it to turn inward, to start manufacturing its own reality. Cognitive performance can plummet. Astronauts, brilliant scientists and pilots chosen for their mental fortitude, might find themselves struggling with basic tasks, lost in a cognitive fog that impairs judgment and slows reaction times. This is not a matter of weakness. It is a matter of biology. The human mind was never designed for this. Then, the social fabric begins to unravel. In this hermetically sealed pressure cooker, there is no escape. A colleague's annoying habit, the way they chew their food, the sound of their breathing, can metastasize over months into an unbearable psychological torment. Minor disagreements can fester, growing into deep-seated paranoia and tribalistic conflict. An emotional echo chamber forms, where anxieties and fears are amplified, bouncing between crew members until they reach a fever pitch. We have seen unsettling glimpses of this phenomenon in Earth-based analogues. Scientists wintering over in the crushing isolation of Antarctica, crews locked for months inside nuclear submarines deep beneath the ocean, the infamous Biosphere 2 experiment. In all these cases, psychological cracks appeared. Cliques formed, resentments boiled over, communication broke down. These were simulations where escape, however difficult, was at least theoretically possible. On the transit to Mars, there is no mission abort. There is no turning back. There is no escape. The crew is trapped not only with the void outside, but with the demons inside, both their own and those of their companions. Imagine the scenario. A critical system fails 9 months into the flight. An alarm shrieks through the cabin. A life or death decision must be made in seconds, but the commander is gripped by a profound depression, unable to muster the will to act. The mission specialist, who knows the system best, is locked in a paranoid feud with the flight engineer and refuses to cooperate. Another crew member, starved for sensory input, is experiencing vivid auditory hallucinations, convinced that they are receiving secret messages from an outside source. This is not the plot of a lurid science fiction thriller. This is the tangible, data-driven risk that keeps psychologists at NASA awake at night. This is the slow-motion shipwreck of the mind, a cascading failure of human consciousness that no amount of engineering redundancy can prevent. We have spent billions of dollars designing the perfect spacecraft, but we're still grappling with the terrifying reality that we have not yet designed the perfect astronaut. We can shield the body from radiation, but how do we shield the mind from despair? We can engineer a closed-loop life support system, but how do we engineer a closed-loop psychological support system that can withstand the crushing weight of 300 million miles of nothing? The pioneers of the American West faced unimaginable hardship, but they had the sky above them and the earth beneath their feet. The sailors of the great age of exploration faced the fury of the oceans, but they could see other ships feel the wind and make port in new lands. The astronauts on their way to Mars will have none of this. They will be the most isolated human beings in history, adrift in a silence that will test the very limits of sanity. Therefore, the ultimate barrier to Mars may not be the challenge of building a better rocket, but the far more complex and delicate challenge of understanding and fortifying the human spirit. The central question of our Martian ambition is no longer, can our technology get us there, but rather, can our minds survive the journey? We are poised to take our first steps into a larger cosmos, to fulfill a destiny that has called to us since the dawn of consciousness. But as we prepare to leave our terrestrial cradle, we must confront the humbling and terrifying possibility that we are taking our oldest and most dangerous enemy with us, ourselves. The greatest abyss is not the one that separates planets, but the one that lies between our ears. And before we can hope to conquer Mars, we must first embark on a far more perilous journey into the vast, uncharted wilderness of the human mind. What is the breaking point of the human mind? We imagine it as a single dramatic snap, a sudden plunge into chaos. But the truth is often quieter, a slow erosion of the soul under relentless pressure. We have pushed ourselves to the very edge of our world, to the highest mountains and the deepest oceans, and in doing so have learned the brutal architecture of our own psychological resilience. Yet, all of our earthly trials are but a dress rehearsal for the true test that awaits us. For over half a century, we have been sending our best and our brightest into the void, into an environment so alien it actively tries to unmake us, atom by atom, thought by thought. And in that silent expanse we have discovered that the most hostile frontier is not the vacuum of space or the fire of a distant star. It is the 3-pound universe of electrified jelly and tangled neurons that we carry inside our own skulls. The journey to Mars will be the longest, most isolated and most psychologically punishing expedition in human history. To understand the madness that may await us there, we must first look back at the ghosts of missions past, at the pioneers who first tasted the profound loneliness of the heavens and returned forever changed. Our story begins not with a bang, but with a whisper inside a cramped metal can hurtling through the dark. The Mercury program. It was a time of breathtaking ambition and almost primitive technology, a clash of soaring ideals and brutal physical realities. The men we chose for this ordeal, the Mercury 7, were lionized as demigods, paragons of a new American mythology. They were fighter pilots, test pilots, men with the right stuff, a colloquialism for an almost inhuman ability to compartmentalize fear and function flawlessly at the edge of death. But the machine we built to carry them was less a chariot of the gods and more a coffin with a view. The Friendship 7 capsule, which carried John Glenn into orbit, had an interior volume roughly equivalent to a public telephone booth. The astronaut was not a pilot in this machine. He was cargo, a biological specimen wired for data, bolted into a seat with his knees bent up toward his chest. He couldn't stand. He could barely shift his weight. For hours he was a prisoner of his own mission, a mind trapped within a body that was itself trapped within a metal shell. This was the crucible where we first encountered the foundational stresses of spaceflight. The first was a solitude so absolute it defies terrestrial comparison. Imagine being utterly alone, not just in a room or a house, but alone on a planetary scale. Through his tiny porthole, the astronaut could see the whole of human history, all of its art, its wars, its love, its noise, recede into a silent, swirling blue and white marble. He was the sole representative of our species in the cosmos, a weight of symbolic importance that is impossible to fully comprehend. This wasn't just loneliness. It was a form of species-level isolation, a metaphysical separation that early flight surgeons had no way to predict or prepare for. Coupled with this was a radical form of sensory deprivation. On Earth, our senses are constantly bathed in a rich tapestry of information. The whisper of wind, the smell of rain, the feeling of solid ground beneath our feet. In the capsule, there was only the monotonous hum of electronics, the hiss of the oxygen system, and the crackle of a distant voice from mission control. The world was reduced to a handful of gauges, a few switches, and the disembodied sound of a single human connection. A voice that was both a lifeline and a constant reminder of the infinite gulf separating him from home. The pressure was immense, a psychological force far greater than the physical G-forces of launch. Every flicker of a light, every unexpected vibration could signal catastrophic failure. A single wrong decision, a moment of hesitation, meant not just personal death, but a national failure broadcast live to a watching world. They were trained to be living computers, to suppress emotion and execute procedures with machine-like precision. But they were still human. Alan Shepard, the first American in space, was famously forced to urinate in his suit on the launch pad after hours of delays, a moment of profound vulnerability and indignity that punctured the myth of the flawless space hero. It was a stark reminder that even our greatest explorers are still bound by the frailties of the human body and the anxieties of the human mind. The Mercury missions were short, a few orbits at most, but they were a terrifying proof of concept. They proved we could survive the physical journey, but they opened a Pandora's box of psychological questions that we are still trying to answer. We had taken the first step, but in doing so, we had learned that the void has teeth and they sink first into the mind. As we grew bolder, our vessels evolved. The Gemini missions followed, carrying 2 astronauts instead of 1, packed shoulder to shoulder in a capsule only slightly larger than its predecessor. Now, the challenge of solitude was replaced by an even more complex demon: interpersonal friction in extreme confinement. The Gemini capsule was the size of the front seat of a small car, and in this space 2 highly competitive Type A personalities had to live and work for days, sometimes weeks on end. There was no privacy, there was no escape. Every breath, every sigh, every small annoyance was amplified in the sealed environment. A disagreement over a procedure, a personal habit that grated on the nerves, these were not trivial matters. They were potential sources of mission-critical error. NASA's psychologists began to understand that choosing a crew was not just about finding the best pilots. It was about creating a delicate psychological ecosystem that could withstand the intense pressure of proximity. You weren't just flying with a co-pilot. You were sealed in a sensory deprivation chamber with your only human contact, and the fate of you both rested on your ability to maintain a functioning professional relationship when every natural instinct might be screaming for personal space. Then came Apollo, the grand crescendo of our first age of exploration. The command module was, by comparison, a palace, but it carried 3 men toward a destination that would redefine human isolation forever. The journey to the moon introduced a new, profound psychological phenomenon. As the Apollo 8 crew became the first humans to leave Earth's orbit, they watched our planet shrink, diminishing from a world to a ball, and then to a fragile blue jewel suspended in a limitless blackness. Frank Borman, the mission commander, described a feeling of overwhelming loneliness. All of humanity, every person who had ever lived or died, was on that tiny, distant disk. They were in the outland, the great beyond, separated from their home by 250,000 miles of lethal vacuum. It was on this mission that the overview effect was first articulated. A cognitive shift in awareness, a sudden visceral understanding of the interconnectedness of life on Earth and its heartbreaking fragility. But this transcendent experience had a dark twin. As the Apollo command module slipped behind the moon, it entered the void's ultimate dead zone. For nearly an hour on each orbit, the crew was utterly and completely cut off. The Earth vanished from view. The radio went silent. In those moments, the 3 men inside were the most isolated beings in the history of the universe. No signal could reach them. No one in the entire cosmos knew for certain if they were even alive. If a catastrophe had struck, they would have simply disappeared. Their silence their only epitaph. This periodic severing of the link to humanity was a psychological stress test of unprecedented scale. It required a deep, primal trust in the laws of physics and the engineering of their vessel, a faith that the Earth would in fact reappear from behind the lunar limb. Every single time that radio signal was reacquired, it was a rebirth, a return from a place of absolute separation. The Apollo missions taught us that the human psyche is anchored to the Earth. That connection, whether visual or auditory, is not a luxury, it is a fundamental requirement. We are a part of our world, and to be cut off from it, even temporarily, is to be set adrift in the deepest, most terrifying ocean imaginable. After the fleeting triumphs of Apollo, our focus shifted from sprinting to the moon to learning how to live in space. The era of the space station had begun, and with it, the era of long-duration missions. Skylab, America's first orbital workshop, was a cavernous habitat compared to what had come before. For the first time, crews would spend not days or weeks in space, but months. And here, the nature of the psychological threat changed. It was no longer about surviving the acute high-stakes terror of a short mission. It was about enduring the chronic, grinding wear and tear of prolonged existence in an unnatural world. The initial euphoria of floating in zero gravity and gazing at the Earth would inevitably fade, replaced by a monotonous routine. The food was bland, the work was repetitive. The view, spectacular as it was, became just a backdrop to another day at the office. It was on Skylab that we saw the first clear evidence of a crew pushing back against the psychological strain. In 1974, the crew of Skylab 4, overworked and exhausted by a relentless schedule dictated from the ground, staged what has been informally called the first strike in space. For a day, they switched off their communications radio and took an unscheduled day off to rest and look out the window. It was a watershed moment. It demonstrated that astronauts were not infallible automatons. Their morale, their mental well-being, and their need for autonomy were critical factors in mission success. The ground controllers learned a vital lesson. You cannot manage human beings in orbit the same way you manage a machine. The mind needs rest, it needs agency, and it needs a connection to its own humanity, even when it's floating 270 miles above the planet. The Soviet Union, and later Russia, pushed the boundaries of endurance even further with the Mir space station. For 15 years, this orbital outpost was humanity's only permanent home in space. It was a testament to engineering genius and human tenacity. But it was also a cramped, aging, and often chaotic environment. Cosmonauts would spend 6 months, a year, sometimes longer, inside its cluttered modules. They endured fires, computer failures, even a collision with a cargo ship that caused the station to depressurize. These were not simulations. They were life-threatening emergencies unfolding in real time, with help hundreds of miles and hours, if not days, away. The psychological toll of living under that constant low-grade threat of disaster was immense. Mir became a laboratory for studying the effects of chronic stress, revealing how the endless hum of machinery, the recycled air with its unique metallic tang, and the constant state of vigilance could slowly erode a person's mental reserves, leading to fatigue, irritability, and depression. It was on Mir that we truly began to understand that spaceflight is a marathon of the mind, and that over time, even the strongest psyche can be worn down by 1,000 tiny cuts. This brings us to our modern-day pinnacle of off-world living, the International Space Station. A sprawling multinational marvel of engineering, the ISS is the largest and most complex spacecraft ever built. It is a city in the sky, a testament to what we can achieve when we work together. But for all its modern comforts, better food, dedicated sleeping quarters, and internet connection, it cannot eliminate the fundamental stresses that have haunted us since the days of Mercury. In fact, it has allowed us to study them with unprecedented scientific rigor, and the findings are deeply unsettling. We have discovered that the human body and mind are profoundly, inextricably linked to the environment in which they evolved. Take them out of that environment, and things begin to go wrong in strange and unpredictable ways. One of the most insidious factors is the disruption of our circadian rhythm. Our entire biology is tuned to a 24-hour cycle of light and dark. This internal clock, honed over millions of years, governs everything from our sleep patterns and hormone production to our cognitive performance. On the ISS, astronauts experience 16 sunrises and 16 sunsets every single day. This constant, chaotic shifting of light cues throws the body's internal clock into disarray. The brain struggles to know when it should be alert and when it should rest. The result is a pervasive, bone-deep fatigue that sleep aids can only partially alleviate. It's a permanent state of jet lag, a chronic desynchronization that impairs judgment, slows reaction times, and degrades mood. Over a 6-month mission, this relentless assault on the body's natural rhythm acts as a powerful stress multiplier, making every other challenge that much harder to bear. Perhaps even more disturbing is what we are learning about how microgravity directly affects the brain itself. On Earth, gravity is a constant, reassuring presence. It tells our brain which way is down, anchoring our sense of spatial orientation. It is the silent partner in every movement we make. In space, this anchor is gone. The brain, deprived of its primary directional cue, begins to physically change. Neuroimaging studies have shown that an astronaut's brain literally floats upwards within the skull, and grey matter volume can shift. The intricate neural pathways responsible for balance, motor control, and spatial awareness have to completely remap themselves to a new, three-dimensional reality, where up and down are meaningless concepts. This rewiring can lead to a phenomenon some astronauts call space fog, a subtle but persistent cognitive slowing, difficulty concentrating, and a feeling of being mentally adrift. It is a form of neurological vertigo. We're discovering that the very hardware of our consciousness is calibrated for Earth's gravity. In its absence, our minds must constantly fight to build a new model of reality, a cognitive effort that consumes precious mental energy every second of every day. The ISS, therefore, has become a beautiful prison. Its famous cupola offers the most spectacular view in the solar system, a constant high-definition feed of our home world gliding by. This connection is a powerful psychological balm, a source of awe and wonder that can sustain an astronaut through the darkest moments. But it is a double-edged sword. That breathtaking view is also a perpetual, silent reminder of everything that has been lost. It is the family you cannot touch, the friends you cannot see, the feeling of wind on your skin, the smell of fresh-cut grass, the simple, grounding pleasure of walking on solid Earth. Every orbit is another glimpse of a paradise you can see but cannot have. This constant presence of an unattainable home can breed a unique form of melancholy, a profound homesickness that technology cannot cure. The ISS has taught us that we have built an incredible outpost on the edge of the cosmos, but we have done so on a very short leash. We are still tethered to Earth by a constant stream of supplies, by real-time communication, and by the comforting knowledge that, in an emergency, a rescue capsule is never more than a few hours away. All of our experience, from the terrified solitude of Mercury to the chronic fatigue of the ISS, has been gathered here in the shallow waters of our own cosmic backyard. But Mars is not in our backyard. Mars is across an ocean of vacuum so vast it redefines the very concept of distance. The mission we are planning will not be a 6-month tour of duty. It will be a 3-year odyssey into the deep. The challenges we have faced so far, the confinement, the isolation, the physiological strain, will not just be present, they will be magnified to an exponential degree. The lifeline to Earth will be stretched until it is unimaginably thin, and then, for all practical purposes, it will be cut. The lessons learned in low Earth orbit are our foundational text, but they are merely the preface. The real story of space madness is yet to be written. And as we prepare to turn that page, we're forced to confront the terrifying possibility that everything we've learned so far has not been a solution, but merely a clearer definition of an unsolvable problem. What happens to the human mind when it can no longer see the Earth? What happens when the comforting blue marble shrinks, fades, and is finally swallowed by the glare of the sun? What happens when you are truly, irrevocably, on your own? But all our experience in orbit, all those decades spent circling our homeworld, have been a rehearsal for a play we've never truly staged. The International Space Station, for all its technological marvel, is a porch swing overlooking a familiar garden. It floats within a protected celestial neighbourhood, a place where Earth is not a distant memory but a colossal living presence filling the window. It is the ultimate psychological anchor, a constant, swirling blue and white reminder of everything you are, everything you've known, and everything you will return to. A distress call from the ISS can reach mission control in milliseconds. A live, comforting conversation with family is a scheduled reality. This proximity has been our safety blanket, a tether of light and radio waves that has kept the human mind grounded even while the body floated free. For a mission to Mars, we will not just snip that tether, we will incinerate it. The journey outwards is a slow, merciless act of cosmic subtraction. For the first few days, Earth will hang in the blackness like a magnificent sapphire, a sight of heartbreaking beauty. But day by day, week by week, that vibrant world will diminish. It will shrink from a life-giving sphere to a bright, featureless star, then to just another point of light, indistinguishable from the countless others piercing the void. And one day, after months of travel, you might look out the portal and be unable to find it at all. This is a moment no human has ever experienced. It is the psychological event horizon, the point of no return for the soul. The feeling of being off-planet will be replaced by a terrifyingly profound new reality. The feeling of being without a planet entirely. This isn't just distance. It is a fundamental severing from the entire biological and historical context of our species. Every human who has ever lived, Every war ever fought, every symphony ever composed, every love ever felt, all of it will be contained in a speck of dust you can no longer see. The weight of that absolute solitude, the true and final understanding that you are completely irrevocably alone, is a psychological pressure for which we have no precedent and no effective shield. Compounding this existential isolation is the crushing reality of the physical cage. Your world for nearly 3 years will be a space smaller than a modest suburban house, a meticulously engineered can of recycled air, recycled water, and recycled scenery. At first, the novelty will sustain you. Every button, every screen, every hydroponic plant will be a marvel of human ingenuity. But time is the great enemy of novelty. Soon, the hum of the life support system, once a reassuring whisper, will become an incessant drone. The recycled air will carry the same stale metallic tang day after day. The texture of the walls, the layout of the modules, the view from the small thick portals, it will all become an unchanging, maddeningly familiar landscape. There is no escape. You cannot step outside for a breath of fresh air. You cannot go for a walk to clear your head. There is no rain to listen to, no wind to feel, no distant horizon to gaze upon. The very concept of outside becomes an abstraction, a hostile vacuum that will kill you in seconds. Your entire sensory world is a closed loop, an environment designed for physical survival, but potentially ruinous for the mind's need for stimulus and change. This profound monotony can trigger a condition known as sensory deprivation psychosis, where the brain, starved of new input, begins to generate its own. Minor irritations can fester, growing into monstrous grievances in the silent, unchanging echo chamber of the ship. The habitat, no matter how ingeniously designed, eventually ceases to be a vessel and becomes a cell, a prison not of steel bars but of inescapable sameness, shared with the same few faces day after day for 1,000 days. The walls of the ship slowly become the walls of your own skull, and the journey to another planet becomes a terrifying journey into the deepest, most claustrophobic recesses of your own consciousness. And through this immense, silent void, your only lifeline to 7 billion souls is a whisper plagued by the tyranny of physics. The communication delay. On the Moon, it was a manageable 1.3 seconds, a slight pause in conversation. For Mars, that delay stretches from a frustrating 4 minutes to an agonizing 22 minutes, each way. This isn't a lag, it is the death of conversation itself. You cannot have a dialogue. You can only send a monologue into the abyss and wait. Imagine a crisis, a fire in the electronics bay, a sudden critical medical emergency. You send your desperate, precisely worded message to Earth. Then, you wait. For 4, 10, perhaps 22 minutes, you're entirely on your own. There is no real-time guidance, no calm voice from Houston walking you through the procedure. There is only the ticking clock and the silence of the void, a silence that stretches into an eternity while your world collapses around you. Mission Control can offer advice, but it will be advice for a problem that is already a ghost, a crisis that has already evolved or ended for better or for worse. The crew becomes the first, last, and only line of defense, a level of autonomy and pressure placed upon no prior group of explorers. The emotional toll is just as devastating. A birthday message from your child arrives as a time capsule, a cheerful greeting from a past you can no longer inhabit. You receive their video, their laughter echoing in your ears, and you record a reply, fighting back tears, knowing that by the time they see it, their birthday will be a distant memory. This asynchronous connection is a cruel parody of intimacy. It transforms loved ones into historical figures, their lives moving on in a world that you're no longer a part of in any meaningful present sense. This temporal gulf exacerbates the feeling of isolation, creating a new, unique form of grief, a mourning for a world that is still alive, but is forever out of sync with your own. The delay effectively transforms Mission Control from a team of active partners into a group of distant archaeologists, studying the crew's predicament from a different point in space-time. The psychological support they can offer is limited to carefully worded letters of encouragement, arriving long after the moment of despair has passed. The crew is, for all intents and purposes, a new, isolated tribe of humanity, and the old world can only watch from across an impassable river of time. This combination of total isolation, inescapable confinement, and asynchronous communication creates a perfect storm for interpersonal conflict. When you select a crew for Mars, you're not just choosing astronauts. You're arranging a multi-year marriage between a handful of brilliant, driven and complex individuals who did not choose each other. On Earth, if you have a conflict with a colleague, you can go home. You can vent to a friend, see a therapist, or change jobs. In the Martian transit vehicle, there is no home to go to, there are no other friends. Your therapist is a 44-minute round trip away. Your greatest rival for a promotion, your most grating acquaintance, the person whose chewing habits drive you to insanity, they are sleeping in the bunk next to yours. They are working with you on life-critical systems. Their face is one of the few you will see for 1,000 days. Minor habits, small slights, differences in communication style. These are the sparks in a habitat filled with the psychological equivalent of pure oxygen. An unwashed coffee cup is not just an annoyance, it's a sign of disrespect that can fester for months. A disagreement over procedure is not just a professional dispute, it's a challenge to authority that can fracture a crew's fragile command structure. Factions can form, resentments can build, layered one on top of the other like sedimentary rock, until the pressure becomes unbearable. One crew member succumbing to depression or paranoia can become a virus, infecting the entire crew's morale and performance. A single, catastrophic breakdown in social cohesion could jeopardize the most expensive and ambitious mission in human history. We imagine our astronauts as paragons of resilience, but they are still human, subject to the same emotional frailties as the rest of us. We would be asking them to perform a miracle of sustained psychological harmony under conditions expressly designed to destroy it. How can we possibly prepare for such an alien psychological landscape? We cannot, not truly, but we can create echoes of it here on Earth. For decades, scientists have been running analog missions, attempts to simulate the crushing isolation and confinement of a long-duration spaceflight. These are our only windows, our only flawed crystal balls for glimpsing the human future in deep space. In a sealed habitat on the barren volcanic slopes of Mauna Loa in Hawaii, the HIC's experiment locked small crews away for up to a year. They wore simulated spacesuits to step outside, ate freeze-dried food, and communicated with the outside world on a 20-minute delay. They were a microcosm of a Mars crew, a laboratory for studying the slow erosion of the human spirit under stress. The data that emerged was sobering. Crew members reported bouts of depression and anxiety. They observed the third quarter phenomenon, a well-documented dip in morale and motivation that often hits crews 3/4 of the way through a long period of isolation, a dangerous trough of despair when the end is still too far away to be encouraging. Even more ambitious was the Mars 500 project. In a facility in Moscow, an international crew of 6 men was sealed inside a complex of windowless modules for 520 consecutive days, the simulated round-trip time to Mars. Their mission was a meticulous dress rehearsal for the psychological ordeal. They conducted scientific experiments, dealt with simulated emergencies, and lived under the constant watchful eyes of psychologists. The findings were a stark warning. The crew's sleep patterns became erratic. Their circadian rhythms fell out of sync with each other, leading to a kind of quiet metabolic chaos. Their physical activity plummeted over time, despite having exercise equipment. Communication with mission control, once frequent and detailed, became shorter and less frequent as the mission dragged on, a sign of withdrawal and disengagement. One crew member developed a persistent depression. Another began to avoid his crewmates, isolating himself even within the isolated environment. There were hidden conflicts, tensions that the crew deliberately concealed from mission control to project an image of unity, a dangerous precedent for a real mission where honesty is critical for survival. These simulations, these ghosts of missions yet to come, teach us a crucial lesson. The engineering challenge of getting to Mars, as immense as it is, may be the easier problem to solve. These earthbound astronauts who could still hear the distant sounds of Moscow traffic and knew that true help was only a sealed door away, still buckled under the psychological strain. What, then, awaits a crew that has no such safety net, A crew for whom the isolation is not a simulation, but an absolute reality measured in hundreds of millions of kilometers. We are charting a course into a territory not just of space and time, but of the human mind itself, a region for which we have no reliable maps. We can select for resilience, we can train for conflict resolution, we can pack the ship with every comfort and distraction imaginable. But we cannot change the fundamental nature of the human animal, a creature born of open savannas, social tribes, and the reassuring presence of a vibrant living world. The data from these dress rehearsals is in, and the message it carries is as stark as the Martian landscape itself. We are asking a small group of people to endure a psychological burden that our species was never evolved to bear. The greatest abyss we must cross is not the vacuum of space, but the one that lies within ourselves. The question is no longer just can we go to Mars, but if we do, what will we become when we get there? What new form of madness awaits us in the deep, and what happens if a mind, fractured by the journey, is the first to set foot on that new world? What we once called the breaking point, that dreaded psychological wall where the mind buckles under the strain, now seems like a tragically simplistic idea. We mapped the territory of confinement, of conflict, of the sheer, soul-crushing monotony of the void, believing the enemy was a ghost within our own psyche. We believed that with enough training, enough screening, enough carefully managed social dynamics, we could conquer this inner demon. But we were looking in the wrong place. The true turning point in our understanding, the revelation that chills mission planners to the bone, is that the ghost isn't just a fleeting feeling, it's a physical intruder. The madness may not be a state of mind at all, but a fundamental change in the state of the brain itself. The journey to Mars, we are now beginning to realize, might not just make you feel like a different person. It might physically rebuild you into one, cell by cell, synapse by synapse, into someone you and mission control no longer recognize. We stand at the precipice of a terrifying new diagnosis, one born from the very fabric of the cosmos, a deep space dementia, an unwinding of the mind that begins the moment you leave the protective cradle of Earth's magnetic embrace. The culprit is as invisible as it is relentless, galactic cosmic radiation. We have no real-world analogue for its effects, no earthly environment that can truly replicate the assault. These are not the familiar X-rays of a doctor's office, or the gentle wash of solar radiation we can shield against. GCRs are the shrapnel of exploded stars, the atomic nuclei of iron, carbon and silicon, stripped bare of their electrons and accelerated by ancient supernovae to nearly the speed of light. They are microscopic cannonballs that tear through a spacecraft's hull as if it were paper, and they tear through the delicate tissues of the human body, the intricate architecture of the brain, with the same indifferent violence. On Earth, our magnetosphere and thick atmosphere act as an impenetrable shield, a planetary force field that has allowed life and consciousness to evolve in safety for billions of years. Out there, on the long road to Mars, there is no shield. An astronaut is utterly exposed. Every second of every day, for months on end, they are subjected to a steady, unending drizzle of these high-energy particles. A single heavy ion, a nucleus of iron, for example, can rip through thousands of cells in a straight line, severing DNA strands, shattering mitochondria, and leaving behind a wake of destructive free radicals. In most parts of the body, this damage can often be repaired. Cells die and are replaced. But the brain is different. Neurons, for the most part, are with you for life. They are the irreplaceable hardware of thought and memory. When a GCR particle blasts through a critical neural pathway, it is like a microscopic stroke, a tiny, silent act of vandalism. The connection is gone. The pathway is severed. At first, the effect is imperceptible. The brain is a master of redundancy, rerouting signals around the damage, creating new connections to compensate. But the assault never stops. Day after day, the microscopic cannonballs keep coming. Thousands of tiny impacts accumulate, a slow, methodical erosion of the neural scaffolding that underpins who you are. Researchers trying to model this have exposed rodents to simulated GCRs. The results are profoundly disturbing. The animals become hesitant, anxious. Their ability to navigate mazes they once knew by heart deteriorates. Their capacity for learning new tasks plummets. They exhibit behaviours eerily similar to those seen in animals with Alzheimer's disease. This is the fear that stalks the dream of Mars, not a sudden, dramatic, psychotic break, but a quiet, insidious decline, a creeping cognitive fog that begins with small things. Forgetting a checklist item, a moment of confusion during a critical manoeuvre, a slower reaction time to a cascade of warning lights. The damage is cumulative, the degradation subtle. An astronaut might not even notice it in themselves, attributing it to fatigue or stress. But to their crewmates, the changes would become apparent. They would see a colleague, a brilliant scientist or a seasoned pilot, who now struggles with complex problems, who has become uncharacteristically irritable or emotionally volatile. The person they trained with for years is slowly being erased, their personality and intellect sandblasted away by invisible particles from across the galaxy. This potential for chronic, radiation-induced brain inflammation and neurodegeneration represents a mission failure point of catastrophic proportions. It suggests that the very act of travelling through deep space could systematically dismantle the one tool absolutely essential for survival: a sharp, rational, and stable human mind. We may be designing the perfect ship, the perfect life support, the perfect mission plan, but we would be sending a crew whose brains are being actively physically damaged with every million miles they travel. And this relentless physical assault is compounded by an equally relentless internal one, a disruption of the most fundamental rhythm of life: sleep. Here on Earth, we are tethered to the gentle, 24-hour cycle of light and dark, a cadence that has governed biology for eons. It is the master clock by which our bodies repair, reset, and prepare. In the sterile, confined habitat of a Mars-bound vessel, that clock is broken. There is no sunrise to stimulate the waking mind, no true sunset to invite rest. There is only the perpetual hum of machinery, the cold glow of instrument panels, and a schedule dictated not by nature, but by the unyielding demands of the mission. Astronauts aboard the International Space Station, a mere 250 miles up, already report significant sleep disturbances. They average barely 6 hours of sleep per night, often fragmented and shallow, punctuated by alarms, experiments, and the simple, maddening discomfort of sleeping in zero gravity. Now project that onto a 3-year mission to Mars, the sleep debt becomes astronomical. We tend to think of sleep deprivation as simply feeling tired, a problem a few cups of coffee can solve. But modern neuroscience reveals a far more sinister reality. During deep sleep, your brain activates a remarkable self-cleaning mechanism called the glymphatic system. It is a microscopic plumbing network that flushes out the metabolic waste and toxic proteins that accumulate during waking hours. One of these proteins is beta amyloid, a sticky substance that, if allowed to build up, clumps together into plaques that clog the pathways between neurons. These amyloid plaques are one of the primary pathological hallmarks of Alzheimer's disease. The link is terrifyingly direct. Chronic long-term sleep deprivation cripples the glymphatic system's ability to clear out this toxin. Night after night on the long journey, as an astronaut struggles to find restorative sleep, this waste would accumulate. The brain's intricate plumbing would slowly back up. The result would be a chemically induced cognitive decline, a slow poisoning from within. Decision-making becomes impaired, memory recall falters, emotional regulation becomes difficult, leading to outbursts of anger or fits of despair. Now imagine this happening inside a mind already being battered by galactic radiation. The GCRs are breaking the hardware, creating microscopic lesions and inflammation. The lack of sleep is preventing the system's software from running its nightly maintenance and diagnostics, allowing toxic sludge to build up in the circuitry. One process attacks the brain structure, the other attacks its chemical balance. It is a devastating 1-2 punch that could accelerate the onset of a profound neurological disorder. This isn't just about an astronaut being grumpy from a bad night's sleep. This is about their brain's core functionality being systematically degraded, their ability to think clearly dissolving in a fog of fatigue and accumulating toxins, millions of miles from any possible help. The mission requires peak human performance for years on end, yet the very environment of the mission may be biologically engineering the opposite. As the physical brain deteriorates under this twin assault, a deeper existential crisis begins to unfold. It is a psychological burden so profound it has no terrestrial equivalent. In the first weeks of the journey, Earth is a breathtaking spectacle, the beautiful blue marble of our collective imagination. It is a symbol of home, of everything and everyone you have ever known. It is your anchor in the cosmos. But as the ship pushes deeper into the black, that anchor begins to drag. The marble shrinks to a pebble, then to a bright star, and finally, it becomes indistinguishable from 1,000 other points of light in the indifferent starfield. This is the moment of the great unmooring. For the first time in human history, individuals will look back and see nothing that is recognizably home. The psychological tether that has connected every human being to our planet for 200,000 years is severed. You're no longer looking at your world. You're simply in the void. This experience transcends mere loneliness or homesickness. It is a state of absolute fundamental isolation. The 20-minute communication delay with mission control is not just a technical lag. It is an abyss of time that separates you from your entire species. You're on your own in a way no human has ever been on its own. The realization that there is no rescue, no quick return, no cavalry coming over the hill, becomes a permanent feature of your consciousness. This profound sense of detachment can trigger a unique and devastating psychological state. Some psychologists have theorized it as a form of cosmic solastalgia, not a longing for a home you have left behind, but a grief for a home that no longer feels real, that has been reduced to a mere abstraction. This existential dread becomes a constant, low-level hum beneath every thought, every action. It can curdle into paranoia, the tiny sealed habitat feeling less like a lifeboat and more like a tomb. Minor irritations with crewmates can flare into deep-seated resentments because there is no escape, no horizon to walk toward, no room to breathe. The human mind evolved to function within a context, a landscape, a tribe. It is not designed to float in an endless, featureless void with its primary point of reference removed. When you strip away that context, the mind can begin to lose its bearings. Reality itself can begin to feel thin, tenuous. This psychological pressure cooker, when applied to a brain already compromised by radiation and sleep deprivation, creates the perfect storm. The damaged hardware can no longer process the emotional overload. The chemical imbalances amplify feelings of anxiety and hopelessness. The existential dread feeds the paranoia, making it impossible to trust your own perceptions or even your own crew. The astronaut is not just lost in space, they are lost in their own mind, unmoored from reality, adrift in a sea of cognitive and emotional chaos. Here, then, is the turning point, the terrifying synthesis of our deepest fears about long-duration spaceflight. The threat is not one thing, but three, a braided cord of affliction that tightens with every passing day. The radiation from the cosmos is actively shredding the physical pathways of thought. The relentless insomnia of the journey is choking the brain in its own metabolic waste, and the crushing absolute isolation is severing the mind from its last psychological anchor. These are not separate issues to be managed. They are a synergistic cascade of neurological and psychological collapse. Each factor amplifies the others, creating a feedback loop of degradation from which there may be no escape. The slow, radiation-induced cognitive decline makes it harder to cope with the emotional stress of isolation. The sleep deprivation worsens the anxiety and paranoia born from that isolation. The existential dread places a cognitive load on a brain that is already struggling to function, accelerating the damage. This is the new model of space madness. Not a single point of failure, but a total system meltdown. It's a vision of an astronaut trapped in a failing machine, their ship, while simultaneously being trapped in a failing body and a fracturing mind. And the ultimate consequence of this breakdown is not the personal tragedy of a single astronaut, but the utter failure of the entire endeavour. Humanity's greatest adventure could end not with a bang, but with a fatal, simple mistake. Imagine the moment. A critical life support system begins to fail. Alarms blare. The crew, 3 years into their journey, must respond with speed and precision. But the lead engineer, Their prefrontal cortex, riddled with the microscopic scars of GCR impacts, struggles to recall the emergency procedure they once knew by heart. The mission commander, their judgment clouded by a week of poor sleep and the buildup of neural toxins, misinterprets a critical data stream, choosing the wrong course of action. Another crew member, overwhelmed by the existential weight of their isolation and simmering paranoia, freezes, unable to trust their own senses or the orders of their compromised commander. The window for action closes. The cascade of failures becomes irreversible. The mission, the multi-trillion-dollar investment of a generation, the lives of the crew and the dream of humanity as a multi-planetary species all extinguish in a moment of quiet, human error. An error born not of incompetence or a lack of training, but from a mind that has been systematically and physically unmade by the very journey it was meant to conquer. The greatest adversary on the path to Mars, it turns out, may not be the vacuum of space or the mechanics of orbital dynamics. It is the insidious fragility of the human brain itself. If the void is actively working to break the minds we send into it, we are faced with a question far more complex than any engineering problem. How do you shield the soul? What armor can we possibly build to protect the consciousness that we are flinging into the great dangerous dark? And so, the invisible wounds begin to fester. Long before the first Martian sunrise stains the horizon, the true abyss opens not in the space between worlds, but within the human mind itself. The initial exhilaration of the journey, the adrenaline of launch and the cosmic ballet of orbital mechanics inevitably gives way to a crushing, protracted silence. This is where the slow-acting poison of deep space begins its work, and the carefully constructed psychological scaffolding of the crew starts to groan under an unimaginable load. The first sign is rarely a dramatic outburst, but a creeping, insidious quiet. It's a change in the quality of the silence inside the habitat, a shift from companionable quiet to the heavy, isolating stillness of withdrawal. This is the onset of what we on Earth would call severe depression, but in the context of Mars it is an entirely different beast. Here, it is not merely a mood disorder, it is a fundamental systems failure. It begins with the loss of anchor points, the psychological tethers that ground our identity. The sun, once a reliable marker of day and life, becomes just another star in a sea of hostile brilliance. The Earth, that beautiful blue marble that filled the window of the Apollo astronauts with profound connection, shrinks to a pinprick of light, a painful reminder of a home that can neither see nor hear you in real time. The 25-hour Martian soul throws the deeply embedded circadian rhythms into a perpetual state of jet lag, a biological confusion that erodes the very foundations of mood and cognition. Sleep, the mind's essential maintenance cycle, becomes a battlefield. Astronauts report dreams of impossible detail and vividness, of green fields and rushing water, only to awaken to the sterile hum of the recycler and the unchanging metallic grey of their tomb-like bunk. This relentless cycle of beautiful dream and harsh reality acts like a form of psychological torture. The joy of memory becomes a source of exquisite pain. Motivation, the fuel for a mission of this magnitude, begins to evaporate. The rigorous daily exercise regimen feels pointless. The carefully planned scientific protocols become a Herculean effort of will. The very act of pulling on a suit, of checking a seal, of running a diagnostic, becomes freighted with a leaden exhaustion that no amount of rest can cure. This is not simple sadness. This is a cognitive and spiritual erosion. The individual feels themselves dissolving, their personality thinning out in the recycled air. They might stare at a control panel they have trained on for a decade and see only a meaningless collection of lights and switches. The sheer unending monotony of the environment, same walls, same food, same faces, day after day, month after month, starves the brain of the novel stimuli. The mind, desperate for something new, begins to turn inward, feeding on itself, chewing on anxieties and old regrets until they swell to monstrous proportions. An unanswered email from a loved one delayed by 20 minutes of lightspeed lag isn't just a delay, it becomes proof of abandonment, a sign that the world has moved on and forgotten the tiny fragile vessel coasting through the dark. this internal collapse inevitably begins to manifest externally in ways that threaten the entire mission architecture. A mind clouded by depression or riddled with anxiety is a mind prone to error, and on a Mars mission there is no margin for error. The smallest mistake, a misread calibration, a forgotten decimal point, a valve turned the wrong way, can cascade into catastrophe with terrifying speed. Imagine the flight engineer, tasked with monitoring the fragile life support system, the electronic lungs of the habitat. Their mind, however, is not on the oxygen partial pressure readings. It is replaying a terse conversation from the day before, or lost in a fog of longing for a life 100 million miles away. In this state of cognitive fog, attention becomes a slippery, unreliable thing. Critical alerts designed to be unmissable might be overlooked for precious seconds. Complex procedures, drilled to the point of muscle memory on Earth, suddenly become confusing, the sequence of steps lost in a haze of indecision. This phenomenon, known as cognitive tunneling, is a known side effect of extreme stress. The brain's processing power narrows dramatically, focusing on a single perceived internal threat, the anxiety, the sadness, at the expense of everything else. The astronaut might fixate on a single irrelevant dial while a far more critical warning flashes just outside their field of view. They might second-guess their own training, their own expertise, hesitating at the very moment when decisive action is the only thing that can avert disaster. We've seen precursors to this in analog missions on Earth, in submarines and Antarctic research stations. A technician, worn down by months of isolation, reverses a critical power connection, frying an entire scientific array. A team leader, grappling with untreated depression, makes a navigation error that endangers their entire crew in a blizzard. Now, amplify that risk by an order of magnitude. There is no evacuation helicopter on Mars. There is no backup crew to relieve you. There is no mission control who can remotely take over the systems if you become incapacitated. A cognitive error born from a psychological crisis is as deadly as a micrometeoroid impact. It can breach the hull of the mission from the inside out. As the internal pressure mounts, the social fabric of the crew begins to fray, and a more sinister shadow emerges: paranoia. The human brain is a pattern-seeking machine. When it is starved of external data and trapped in a high-stakes environment, it begins to invent patterns, to connect dots that aren't there. It starts to create narratives to explain the ambient anxiety, and often that narrative involves a threat. In the profound isolation of deep space, that threat is almost always perceived to be another member of the crew. It begins subtly. A crewmate who is unusually quiet isn't seen as depressed or tired. They are perceived as secretive, plotting, hostile. A shared tool left in the wrong place isn't a simple mistake. It's a deliberate act of sabotage, a passive-aggressive power play. The constant surveillance, the biomedical sensors monitoring every heartbeat and sleep cycle, turns from a safety measure into a tool of oppression in the paranoid mind. Who is watching my data? What are they thinking? Is the commander building a case against me? The 20-minute communication delay with Earth becomes a chasm of suspicion. The carefully worded, psychologically vetted messages from mission control are dissected for hidden meanings, for coded criticisms. The crew, once a unified band of pioneers, starts to fracture into factions of two or one. Conversations become clipped, whispered. Eye contact is avoided. Every closed hatch, every private data log entry becomes a source of intense speculation. This isn't a failure of character, it's a predictable failure of human neurochemistry under impossible stress. The mind, hyper-vigilant and desperate for an enemy it can identify, creates one out of the very people upon whom survival depends. The habitat, once a sanctuary against the void, transforms into a psychological pressure cooker. The airlocks are not just keeping the vacuum out, they are sealing the suspicion and resentment in. Every single human interaction is magnified and distorted, like an image through a warped lens. The way someone chews their food, the sound of their breathing in the bunk next to you, a slight change in their tone of voice, these tiny annoyances, easily dismissed on Earth, become unbearable provocations. They are kindling for a firestorm of aggression, and then the fire ignites. The carefully maintained veneer of professionalism, the years of team-building exercises, the shared dream that propelled them across the solar system. It all burns away, revealing the raw, primal instincts beneath. The first stage is often verbal. Sarcasm becomes the common language, sharp and cutting. Disagreements over scientific procedure devolve into personal attacks. The shared mess hall becomes a silent battlefield, each crew member retreating into a defended personal space, communicating only when absolutely necessary. The concept of crew is replaced by competitors, or worse, inmates. From there, the escalation is terrifyingly swift. Passive aggression gives way to open hostility. A shouted argument over a failed experiment echoes through the thin metal walls, a sound more shocking and alien in this silent place than any solar storm. Crucial data might be accidentally deleted. Personal items might go missing. In the most extreme scenarios, documented in the annals of terrestrial isolation, this can lead to physical confrontation, a shove in a narrow corridor, a struggle over a piece of equipment. In the close quarters of a Martian habitat, surrounded by delicate, life-sustaining technology, a physical fight is not just a breakdown of discipline, it is an act of collective suicide. It could rupture a coolant line, smash a control interface, or tear a suit. This is the ultimate nightmare scenario. The crew becomes a greater threat to the mission than the hostile Martian environment itself. The complex, interwoven dance of cooperation, required to survive on another world, collapses into a dysfunctional chaos of distrust and animosity. Who can you trust to check your suit seals when you believe they resent your very existence? How can you perform a complex two-person EVA on the surface when you fear the person holding your safety tether might just let go? The mission plan, so elegant and precise on paper, relies on a single fragile assumption: that the human beings executing it will remain rational, cooperative, and sane. When that assumption fails, the entire multi-billion-dollar enterprise collapses with it. The greatest single point of failure on a mission to Mars is not the rocket, not the life support, not the radiation shielding. It is the human psyche. Here, we arrive at the most terrifying truth of all. When this crisis hits, when a mind breaks, or a crew turns on itself, there is no one coming to help. There is no emergency psychiatric intervention team. There is no medevac. The light from Earth takes 20 minutes to reach them. The apathetic, pre-recorded advice from a therapist on the ground would be a cruel joke. The crew is utterly, completely, and irrevocably on their own. They are not just astronauts, geologists, and engineers anymore. They are now forced to become something for which they have no training. They must become crisis counselors, hostage negotiators, and psychiatrists for one another, in the middle of the most dangerous and unforgiving environment humanity has ever entered. Imagine the burden. The mission commander, already responsible for the lives of her crew and the success of the mission, must now attempt to guide a paranoid crewmate back from the brink of delusion. The ship's doctor, a surgeon by training, has to consult a digital medical library to try and determine the right dosage of antipsychotic medication for an individual who is becoming violent, all while that individual is still a required member of the team, needed for daily survival tasks. They must improvise. They must attempt to conduct therapy sessions for which they are profoundly unqualified, trying to untangle the complex knots of a mind coming undone, knowing that their own survival depends on their success. How do you counsel a person who sees you as part of the conspiracy against them? How do you reason with someone in the grip of a depressive episode so severe they can no longer see the point in filtering their own water for the next cycle? How do you de-escalate a potentially violent confrontation between two colleagues when you yourself are exhausted, stressed, and struggling with your own psychological demons? This is the ultimate crucible. The crew must perform a kind of psychological surgery on themselves, without anesthesia, without proper tools, and with the entire world watching on a time delay, blissfully unaware of the true horror unfolding in that small habitat so far from home. The mission design accounts for spare parts for every critical system, from the water reclaimer to the flight computer, but there are no spare parts for a broken mind. There are no easy replacements for shattered trust. The crew is launched as a closed system, a delicate human ecosystem, and if it becomes contaminated by psychological illness, it must find a way to heal itself or perish. They are their own first responders, their own last line of defense. They must somehow find the strength to save their friends from the enemies within their own heads, even as they fight a desperate battle against the same encroaching darkness themselves. They are castaways on a red shore, and the greatest monsters they face are not in the alien landscape, but in the reflections staring back at them from inside their own helmets. The question we are now forced to confront, the one that mission planners wrestle with in sleepless nights, is a stark one. Faced with the inevitable fracturing of the human mind under such alien pressures, what tools can we possibly give them to piece themselves back together? And yet, faced with this psychological abyss, this near certainty of a mind under siege, we do not turn back. We do not surrender the dream to the darkness. Instead, we do what our species has always done when confronted with an impossible frontier. We innovate, we adapt, we begin the painstaking, monumental task of building a bridge across the void, not of steel and iron, but of ingenuity, empathy, and a profound new understanding of the human mind itself. The greatest challenge of the mission to Mars is not escaping Earth's gravity, but taking the resilience of the human spirit with us. It requires forging a new kind of astronaut, protected by a new kind of armor, an invisible, psychological exoskeleton designed to withstand the crushing pressures of deep space. This fortification begins long before the engines ever ignite, here on Earth, in quiet rooms where the very architecture of a candidate's mind is meticulously mapped and stress-tested. The selection process for the first Martian crews has evolved into one of the most sophisticated psychological undertakings in human history, a search not for the fearless, but for the profoundly self-aware. The old right stuff ethos of the stoic, unflappable test pilot, while legendary, is an insufficient blueprint for a 3-year journey into sensory deprivation. Today's selectors are looking for something far more nuanced: psychological anti-fragility. They seek individuals who don't just endure stress but can actually learn and grow stronger from it, who can bend without breaking and then reinforce the point of flexion. Candidates are immersed in long-duration simulations that are deliberately, cruelly boring, designed to replicate the soul-crushing monotony of the transit. They are subjected to intricate social puzzles, engineered to provoke conflict over dwindling resources or ambiguous instructions, all while their every biometric signal, every vocal inflection, every micro-expression is analysed by teams of psychologists and advanced machine learning algorithms. Who defers? Who dominates? Who builds consensus when egos are frayed and exhaustion has set in? The goal is not to find a perfect mind, for no such thing exists. The goal is to find minds that understand their own imperfections, that possess a kind of emotional literacy so advanced they can diagnose their own spiraling thoughts and, crucially, recognize the subtle warning signs in their crewmates before they cascade into crises. They are searching for a crew that can function as a single, self-regulating organism, a collective consciousness bound for another world. It is a process less like an audition and more like the tempering of a blade, repeatedly heated in the furnace of simulated adversity and then plunged into the cold waters of analysis, each cycle adding strength and resilience to the final steel. But even the most resilient mind is still human, still vulnerable to the gnawing loneliness of being 100 million miles from everything it has ever known. This is where the ship itself must become an active participant in the crew's mental well-being. It must transform from a mere machine into a partner, a guardian. Enter the ship's AI, a silent crew member woven into the very fabric of the vessel. This is not the cold HAL 9000 of science fiction, but a highly advanced companion, a digital anchor in the cosmic ocean. This AI is being designed as a synthetic confidant, its core programming built around principles of cognitive behavioral therapy and active listening. It learns the unique baseline of each astronaut, the cadence of their speech, their heart rate variability during sleep, their typing speed, even their patterns of movement through the habitat. It is a guardian algorithm constantly and passively monitoring for the subtle tells of psychological distress long before the astronaut might even recognize them. A slight increase in vocal pitch, a tendency to use more negative valence words in a log entry, a pattern of a restless sleep. None of these alone is an alarm, but together they paint a picture for the AI. It wouldn't intervene with a jarring alert, but with a gentle, almost subliminal nudge. It might subtly alter the ambient lighting to a warmer, more calming hue. It could suggest a piece of music from a pre-selected personal library, a melody scientifically shown to reduce cortisol levels. Or it could engage the astronaut through a voice interface, not as a doctor, but as a curious companion. I noticed your carbon dioxide scrubber maintenance protocol was completed 12% faster than your average. You seem focused today. What's on your mind? This constant, non-judgmental presence offers an outlet for thoughts and fears that an astronaut might hesitate to share with a crewmate, fearing they might be perceived as a weak link. The AI becomes a confessional, a thinking partner, a mirror reflecting their own state of mind back to them with objective data. For an international crew, it could also serve as an infallible cultural translator, not just for language, but for social cues and norms, smoothing over the inevitable friction that arises when different worldviews are sealed in a confined space for years. This synthetic mind isn't a replacement for human connection, but a crucial supplement, a safety net designed to catch a mind in freefall, a digital ghost in the machine whose sole purpose is to preserve the humanity of those it serves. Yet, there are wounds that logic cannot heal, forms of grief and isolation that no algorithm can soothe, the profound, primal ache of missing Earth, the feeling of rain, the smell of wet soil, the sight of a boundless blue sky is a condition known as solastalgia, a homesickness for a home you haven't technically left but which is now just a distant pale blue dot. To combat this sensory starvation, mission planners are turning to another revolutionary tool: virtual reality. The VR suite aboard a Mars-bound vessel will be far more than a recreational device. It will be a sanctuary, a portal back to the world that was sacrificed. This is not a video game, it is a meticulously crafted, neurologically targeted therapy. Imagine an astronaut, after months of staring at sterile white walls and the unchanging blackness outside, donning a lightweight headset. In an instant, the cramped module dissolves. She's standing not in a metal can, but on the familiar rocky coastline where she grew up. She can hear the crash of the waves, feel a simulated sea breeze on her skin via haptic feedback, and smell the salty air, a scent released by a synchronized olfactory unit. The system is linked to her personal memories populated with photorealistic avatars of her family. She can walk through a perfect simulation of her childhood home, sit in her favorite armchair, and even have a conversation with a deep fake avatar of her spouse, generated from countless hours of pre-recorded video and audio, powered by an AI that can respond with unnerving accuracy. These virtual pilgrimages are carefully rationed and prescribed by the mission psychology team back on Earth, acting as a kind of controlled dose of home. They are powerful tools for staving off the psychological decay of sensory deprivation, and for processing the unique grief of planetary separation. For another crewmate suffering from interpersonal conflict, the VR system could offer a guided meditation in a serene Japanese garden. For someone feeling the effects of confinement, it could be a heart-pounding rock climb in a vast open canyon. It is a window where no window can exist, a patch for the human soul, providing the specific terrestrial stimuli needed to recalibrate a mind that is being fundamentally untethered from its evolutionary context. The technology allows the crew to temporarily leave the mission without ever leaving the ship, a vital paradox that may be the key to ensuring they arrive at Mars with their sanity intact. This understanding, that the environment is not a passive backdrop but an active agent in mental health, is revolutionizing the very architecture of the spacecraft. The engineers designing the Martian transit habitats are now working hand in hand with neuroscientists and environmental psychologists. The result is a design philosophy that treats the ship not as a piece of hardware, but as a living organism engineered for psychological survival. The old submarine-style model of cramped, purely functional corridors is being replaced with concepts of dynamic, adaptable living spaces. Lighting systems are a prime example. They are not merely on or off, they are fully autonomous circadian regulators, subtly shifting their colour temperature and intensity throughout the 24-hour cycle to perfectly mimic the sunrise, bright midday sun, and sunset of a day on Earth. keeping the crew's internal body clocks anchored and preventing the mood disorders that come with their disruption. Space will be personalised. Each astronaut will have a private crew quarter, a small but inviolable sanctuary that they can customise. Perhaps the walls are high-fidelity screens that can display a forest, a cityscape, or family photos. Textures are being carefully considered. Surfaces will not be uniformly cold, smooth metal, but will incorporate wood-grain composites, fabric panels, and other materials that are comforting to the touch. The central living area will be circular, a design that psychological studies have shown encourages more communal and less confrontational interaction. And then there is the crucial element of life. The ship's hydroponics bay, essential for supplementing food supplies, will double as a therapeutic green space, a lush, vibrant garden of fresh vegetables and herbs. This simple, meditative act of tending to these plants, of nurturing life in the most sterile environment imaginable, is an incredibly powerful psychological balm. This biophilia, humanity's innate need to connect with nature, is so vital that even this small artificial ecosystem could become the spiritual heart of the ship, a living reminder of the world they're fighting to return to. Even with the most resilient crew, a sentient ship, and a therapeutic environment, the unique neurochemical stresses of long-duration spaceflight may require a more direct intervention. This leads us to one of the most delicate and controversial areas of preparation: pharmacology. The idea of medicating astronauts has long been taboo, fraught with fears of side effects, dependency, or impaired performance. But the approach being developed for Mars is a world away from a simple bottle of antidepressants. We are entering the age of precision psychopharmacology, a bespoke neurochemical toolkit designed to support, not supplant, an astronaut's natural cognitive and emotional functions. These are not blunt instruments, they are scalpels. Researchers are developing compounds that can, for example, bolster cognitive function during periods of intense sleep deprivation without the jittery side effects of traditional stimulants. Others are designed to fine-tune the sleep-wake cycle, ensuring that the deep restorative sleep necessary for memory consolidation and emotional regulation is achievable, even when the body is confused by the lack of traditional day-night cues. For mood regulation, the focus is on microdosing and targeted medications that can act as a neurochemical ballast, helping to stabilize the mind against the violent waves of anxiety or depression without numbing the astronaut's senses or flattening their personality. Each crew member would have a personalized formulary, developed based on their unique genetic and psychological profile. The decision to use such a tool would be theirs alone, in consultation with medical staff, empowering them with one more layer of defense. It is a pragmatic recognition that the brain is a biological organ, and that in an environment as profoundly alien as interplanetary space, it may sometimes require chemical support to continue functioning at the extraordinary level required of it. Ultimately, however, the most powerful defense against the madness of space is not found in a silicon chip, a virtual world, or a pill. It is found in the bonds between the crew members themselves. The final and most critical layer of the psychological armour is forged in the crucible of training. The crews for Mars will undergo some of the most intense and realistic team-building exercises ever conceived. They will be isolated for months at a time in mock habitats in the Antarctic or in volcanic craters, locations on Earth that mimic the harshness and isolation of another planet. But these simulations are not about testing technical skills. They are about stress-inoculating the human relationships. Mission controllers will deliberately inject chaos into these simulations. A life support system will fail at the same time a communications blackout is initiated, all while one crew member is being given secret instructions to be uncooperative and argumentative. The goal is to push the crew to the brink of social breakdown in a controlled environment. It is here that they practice the techniques that will save them: active listening, non-violent communication, cultural competence, and radical empathy. They learn to read the subtle language of a crewmate's posture, to hear the exhaustion hiding behind a clipped response, to know when to offer help and when to give someone space. They are trained in conflict resolution with the same rigour they are trained in orbital mechanics. They rehearse difficult conversations, learning how to voice frustration or disappointment constructively, transforming potential grievances into moments of team cohesion. They are, in essence, being taught to be each other's therapists, to be the front line of mental health support. They develop a bond that transcends mere professionalism, a form of familial trust born from shared, manufactured hardship. They learn to fail together on Earth, so they will know how to succeed together on the way to Mars. This relentless focus on the human element is the final, indispensable piece of the puzzle. For in the end, the technologies are merely support systems for the most complex and powerful machine on the entire mission. A small group of human beings who must rely on their training, their tools, and ultimately their shared commitment to one another to carry the fragile flame of human consciousness across the darkness. The question that remains, the one that will be answered only in the silent passage between worlds, is whether all this preparation, this monumental effort to fortify the mind, will truly be enough. And so, we arrive at the final frontier, not the vacuum of space, nor the frozen canyons of Mars, but the intricate, uncharted territory of the human mind. We have journeyed through the staggering technical challenges, the monumental feats of engineering required to hurl a fragile vessel across hundreds of millions of kilometers of hostile emptiness. We have confronted the spectres of cosmic radiation, the insidious decay of bone and muscle in zero gravity, and the brutal calculus of life support systems where every gram of water, every breath of air is a precious currency. Yet, after all the equations have been solved, after the heat shields have been perfected and the rockets have been built, we find ourselves standing before the ultimate variable, the one element that cannot be perfectly modelled or easily repaired: us. The virtual reality landscapes we've designed to mimic home, the sophisticated AI companions programmed for empathy, the time-delayed communications protocols and meticulous psychiatric screenings. All of these are marvels of human ingenuity. They represent our best attempt to build a sanctuary for the mind, a psychological life support system for a journey that will strain the very fabric of sanity. But they remain, in the end, a scaffolding. A carefully constructed support structure built around the core enigma, the consciousness of the explorers themselves. Because the true mission to Mars is not a voyage of technology, it is a voyage of consciousness, undertaken by a mind that evolved to track predators on a sun-drenched savanna, not to withstand 3 years of profound cellular isolation while trapped inside a machine adrift in an infinite void. We have seen how the Earth, a pale blue dot shrinking in the viewport, can transform from a symbol of home into a source of unbearable grief, a planet you can see but never touch, a paradise lost. We have explored the solitary, that yawning abyss of isolation that threatens to unravel the most disciplined minds, turning crewmates from trusted allies into sources of intense friction. The constant humming awareness that you are utterly alone, that help is not minutes or hours away but an impossible 9 months, is a weight no simulation can ever truly replicate. It is a form of pressure more intense than any deep-sea trench, a psychological gravity that seeks to crush the human spirit. This is the essence of the challenge we have called space madness. It is not a simple diagnosis to be found in a medical textbook. It is a tapestry woven from threads of loneliness, anxiety, paranoia, and the existential dread that can fester in the silent darkness between worlds. It is the brain's rebellion against an environment it was never meant to inhabit. For decades, we viewed the astronaut as a perfect machine, a steely-eyed pilot with an unwavering pulse, the right stuff. We celebrated their physical courage, their technical brilliance. But we are now beginning to understand that the true right stuff for the interplanetary age is not just courage, but profound self-awareness. It is not just resilience, but a deep capacity for empathy and vulnerability. The heroes who will walk on Mars will not be unfeeling automatons. They will be individuals who have mastered their own inner space, who have learned to navigate the treacherous landscapes of their own minds with the same precision they use to pilot their spacecraft. They will be poets and philosophers as much as they are scientists and engineers. They must be, for their survival depends on it. The greatest danger on the long road to Mars may not be a solar flare or a micrometeoroid impact, but a moment of despair in the soul of a crewmate, a flicker of paranoia that ignites a cascade of distrust, a simple, crushing loss of hope. The mission, therefore, becomes a crucible. It will test not only the limits of our technology, but the very foundations of our humanity. Can we maintain compassion when we are stripped of everything familiar? Can we foster community in the most isolated environment imaginable? Can we find meaning and purpose when we are severed from our entire world, suspended in a timeless, featureless expanse? These are not questions for Mission Control to answer. They are questions that will be answered in the quiet, whispered conversations inside the transit habitat, in the shared meals, in the way the crew members look after one another's psychological well-being as diligently as they monitor the ship's oxygen levels. Success will be measured not just by the geological samples collected or the experiments conducted on the Martian surface. It will be measured by the mental health of the crew upon their return, by their ability to come back to Earth not as broken survivors, but as changed, enlightened pioneers who faced the void and found within themselves the strength to endure. And in solving this, we may just find solutions for ourselves back here. The challenges of a Mars mission are an extreme, concentrated version of the challenges modern society is increasingly facing on Earth. How do we cope with social isolation in an ever more connected yet lonely world? How do we manage stress and anxiety in high-pressure environments? How do we build cohesive, supportive teams from diverse individuals? The psychological tools developed for a handful of astronauts, the mindfulness techniques, the conflict resolution protocols, the systems for monitoring mental well-being without stigma, could become invaluable for millions on our own planet. The research being done to keep a crew sane on the way to Mars is, at its core, research into the human condition. Mars, in this sense, acts as a cosmic mirror. It reflects our greatest ambitions, our most brilliant innovations, and, in the stark, unforgiving light of deep space, our deepest vulnerabilities. By striving to protect the minds of those we send into the darkness, we are forced to better understand the mind itself. But this journey, this immense undertaking, is not the final destination. Conquering the psychological hurdles of a mission to Mars is not the endgame. It is the beginning. It is the necessary, agonizing, and ultimately transformative rite of passage that humanity must endure if we are ever to truly become a multiplanetary species. Mars is the great filter, the final exam before we graduate to the solar system. Because beyond the red planet, the abyss only deepens. The distances become even more incomprehensible. A mission to the moons of Jupiter would mean a communication delay measured not in minutes, but in hours. The Earth would shrink to an insignificant point of light, indistinguishable from any other star in the celestial tapestry. The sense of separation would be absolute, the isolation complete. Any mission beyond our solar system to the nearest exoplanet would be a journey not of years, but of generations. A voyage where the crew would live and die in transit, their children and their children's children inheriting a mission begun by ancestors they never knew, heading toward a destination they will only reach as elders. What kind of psychological fortitude would that require? What kind of societal structure, what sense of purpose, could sustain a community across centuries of interstellar travel? These are the questions that await us. The whispers of space madness we fear on the 9-month trip to Mars would become a deafening roar on a 1,000-year journey to Alpha Centauri. Without mastering the mind, without understanding how to protect it, how to nurture it, how to give it purpose across unimaginable spans of time and distance, the stars will forever remain beyond our reach. We can build ships capable of interstellar travel, propulsion systems that bend the laws of physics. But if we cannot solve the challenge of the human spirit, those ships will become nothing more than magnificent tombs, carrying our dreams into an eternity of silence. The work we do now, in preparing for that first tentative step to Mars, is the foundation upon which all of our interstellar ambitions will be built. We are learning to build not just a spaceship, but a soul ship, a vessel capable of carrying not just human bodies, but human hope, intact, across the cosmic ocean. So when we look up at the night sky, at the pinprick of light that is Mars, we should see more than just a destination. We should see a challenge, a test, and a promise. It is the place where humanity will either turn back, defeated by the vastness of space and the fragility of our own minds, or we will prove that we are worthy of the universe we inhabit. We will prove that our consciousness, born from the dust of ancient stars, is not a fleeting accident confined to one world, but a force capable of carrying itself out into the cosmos, of understanding its own place in the grand, silent symphony of existence. The first human to step onto Martian soil will not just be leaving a footprint in the red dust, they will be planting a flag for the resilience of the human spirit. They will represent every one of us who has ever felt lonely, every one of us who has ever struggled with the darkness within, and every one of us who has found a way to endure, to hope, and to keep going. They will be the apotheosis of our species' long journey out of the caves, our relentless, often painful, but always hopeful climb toward the stars. The conquest of space, in the end, is not about conquering other worlds. It is about conquering ourselves. It is about facing the profound emptiness and discovering in that silence what truly makes us human. And armed with that knowledge, that self-awareness forged in the crucible of deep space, we will be ready. Ready for Mars, ready for the moons of Saturn and Jupiter, and ready one day to take our place among the stars, carrying the fragile, beautiful, and unbreakable fire of human consciousness into the endless night. The journey will be perilous, the risks immense. But the human spirit, when inspired by a great purpose, has always found a way to overcome the impossible, and our journey into the universe has only just begun.